Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first round recap from the Sinquefield Cup, a very exciting tournament indeed. We are just on the back of the Blitz and Rapid tournament where Firouzja has shown his real class and actually skyrocketed from 2780 to 2900 in Blitz. So now the world is very excitedly watching a normal, regular time control tournament where the world champion, the reigning world champion, Magnus Carlsen is partaking, as well as number one candidate, Jan Nepomniachtchi. Moreover, these two gentlemen were actually paired against one another for round one, so we kick off right away with a super exciting battle between the reigning world champion, who gave up his title, so he's not going to defend the title, and Jan Nepomniachtchi, who is the number one favorite to actually take the crown. So let's see how these two played against one another in the first round of the Sinquefield Cup. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, and d5 took us right away into the classical Queen's Gambit declined, where I'm classically pressing the wrong button to take us to the end. And after c d knight c3, on the board is the evergreen Carlsbad structure, something that books have been written on, and still I feel like we're still exploring the real depth of this mysterious structure, which is mostly notable for the so-called minority attack, where white tries to create some kind of a weakness in the black pawn chain after the move c6 is being played, which is usually b4, b5. This game, however, has something slightly different in store for us. Bishop f4, bishop f5, e3, very standard, regular developing moves following theory, by the way. All the way to bishop e2, and queen b6 was actually the first new move. Castles have been played twice on a higher level, but queen b6 makes quite a bit of sense, introducing the queen in the game, tickling the b2 pawn, and queen b3 was the response. And right away, by the way, we arrive at a very curious motif and concept that I talk a lot about on my channel, and there is a great deal of misunderstanding and misconceptions about it, and that topic is none other than the question of double pawns, which most lower rated players and club level players look upon as, oh, that is terrible. And that is actually fundamentally wrong. There are myriads of cases and opening variations and situations where the double pawns are actually positively and benefit and extra to the position, and so they must be evaluated on an individual basis. And so dismissing key, for example, the queen b3 move on basis of, oh, if they take, I have double pawns, is just fundamentally wrong. Like, that is just totally not the right way to approach. Here, for example, and in many other similar cases, by the way, the double pawns have actually a potential dual benefit for white. The very obvious one is that now the a file is open for the rook, so there is a bit of a pressure on a6. The less obvious one is that at times white can actually go b4, b5, and then repeat the operation again, having two b pawns, therefore doubling down on the minority attack concept. So long story short, like in many other cases, here too, the double pawns are definitely not a problem for white. On the contrary, as you will see in the game, Magnus is trying to actually turn it to his own benefit. Let's see how. Bishop g6, knight h4, bishop b4, takes. Likewise, by the way, double pawns here too. Now black has an open file. Sometimes the g4 pawn hangs, and the position, or rather I should say the structure, has not become worse. In fact, you often find that double pawns and pawn blocks like these are far more effective in holding pawn majorities than the straight outline of pawns. So again, this doubling of the pawns had no negative impact whatsoever on Jan Nepomniachtchi's position. f3, knight f8, king f2, knight e6, bishop g3, king e7, and here I think it's a very good point to stop and just talk about the position. First and foremost, very interesting to note, and I think it's important to stretch, that this position for all intents and purposes is dead even. However, that has no relevance whatsoever in this competitive context where we have got Magnus Carlsen, the very chess player who is most notoriously the best that has ever been at just grinding out equal positions. Because yes, this is equal, but it's not a draw. It's an equal position that has immense potential for both sides, and no chess player has ever been as good as grinding these down to a victory as Magnus Carlsen. Karpov and Capablanca came very close, but in my book, Carlsen is the absolute epitome of how to play these very... I wouldn't even call them dry because they're playable positions. They're just drawish or equalish, but somehow he turns them into not so drawish, and the ease with which he just turns these positions from nothing to simple victories is just breathtaking. Let's watch his technique. H4, just a bit of a space gain on the king side. A6, king g2, a little adjustment. And by the way, part of his artistry and mastery is that he mixes in, and this is very Karpovian, by the way, he mixes a fair few moves of very little relevance and some that are quite important, and when you are on the receiving end of these moves, you very often get confused and you don't understand what is played for what, and you tend to overlook the meaningful ones, and all of a sudden you are faced with a move where you go like, oof, I didn't see this coming, and the advantage is already on Carlsen's side. Bishop f2, bishop d6. By the way, as far as the structure is concerned, Black needs to be constantly on the lookout for an e4 break on White's end, and White sometimes needs to reckon with c5 being a black break. Bishop d3, bishop b8, knight a4, bishop d6, and we are approaching the most crucial moment of the game when Magnus plays bishop e1, and again, this is a testimony to the power of the double pawns, yet again, because bishop b1 actually sends a message that, oi, I want to play b4, and then I want to chuck a knight on c5. You are not going to like that. And indeed, if I was playing this game with Black, I would get nervous about that plan. That looks annoying, because it very clearly makes progress for White, and I very clearly cannot ignore it, and there is no very apparent way, good way for Black, and I'm just going to play 2 lemons to demonstrate this idea, to actually deal with the hanging pawn. I can't push because a6 hangs. I really don't want to take, straightening the pawn structure and allowing White to gain significant space in center queen side, and so all of a sudden b4 pawn, the ugly double pawn, is a trump card, and knight c5 is a supremely annoying threat. And in light of that, Nepomniachtchi decided to change the trend in the game and played c5, with which I think he played the only mistake of the entire game. Well, until the very end when obviously things fell apart. But the first mistake for sure that allowed Magnus to grab the advantage. And again, when I looked at this move, and I saw the engine's evaluation, I was like, I'm not quite sure why this is so bad, because after the trade, we land in a scenario where Black has got an IQP, an isolated pawn, which obviously isn't a good thing to have in an endgame, but at the same time, White is now stuck with an e3 backward pawn, which is also nothing to write home about. Now, correctly evaluating that this is in White's favor is a very difficult task, and in my opinion, again, no one does it better than Magnus, who very clearly saw through it and evaluated that he has the potential to just build it. Bishop d2, king f2, bring the bishop around, and again, use those double pawns. Look at this, absolutely marvelous stuff. He plays bishop d2, rook e8, very logical, and bang, b4. And all of a sudden, b4, b5, and the double b pawns, those ugly ducklings, have become the game-winning assets for Magnus Carlsen. Because what happens here now is that I can't really take this, because then after bishop b5, the rook is very awkwardly hanging, and bishop b4 check. Boy, oh boy, the two bishops are firing down on the diagonals like mad, and this is looking really, really depressing for Black now. On top of that, we have the A file in our control, so this is just looking like $1 million. And obviously, they can't, Black can't let White just take, because that would be a clear extra pawn. So what to do. Nepo decided to sack the pawn away in a way where the double b pawn stayed against the single b pawn, which still doesn't look like the end of the world. But Magnus here, from here on out, is just absolutely clinical in converting this, which, by the way, I do think is now a winning position. King d6, king f2, defending the pawn on e3, rook e7, rook d1 is a minor inaccuracy, b6 was already here. The winning idea, something we shall see later, with the idea of opening up the rook's vision towards d5, and then rook d1, bishop c4 is going to successfully pile up on that pawn. Magnus did it with a slightly different move order, and played here rook a4, again b6. The engine insists on this lovely move, and again we are utilizing beautifully the extra pawn, even if it's a doubled one. Knight takes, rook here, king c1, and now we are this close to winning a piece by rook c1 check. But after knight c4, the rook is hanging. So first we play e4, ensuring that after rook c1, knight c4, we have rook takes d5 and the knight is lost. And now rook c1 check is a terminal threat against black, has not an awful lot to offer. This position is pretty much dead, lost already. Magnus chose the more human rook a4, keeping the pawn on h4 securely guarded, and now getting ready for the attack on the d5 pawn. Rook knight c5, rook g4. And this again, by the way, showcases Magnus's brilliance, that a lot of players would be extremely reluctant to consider rook a4 here, because it allows black to trade down into a 4 rook endings, which tend to have a notorious drawish tendency. But here, amazingly, the d5 pawn is just falling out of the sky no matter what. Rook d7 here, and after e4, due to the pin on the d file, we are headed straight for a pawn ending where white's extra pawn, even if it's double, is going to be the decisive factor. So Jan could not actually liquidate into the double rook, 4 rook endings, and instead went with king c7. But now after bishop b1, the position is falling apart, and once again Magnus's intuition reigns supreme. The d5 pawn is actually weaker than e3, and after bishop a2 it is going to be hunted down. Rook e5 was played, and after bishop a2, f6, take, and rook takes d5, Magnus managed to mop up the game. The final touch is very beautiful, by the way, so let's have a look at that. Knight d3 check, king g3, knight e5, rook f4, and on rook d8 came the check, the beautiful cryptogras. Now king takes b6 allows white to pick off a very meaningful pawn on f6 whilst giving up the double pawn. By the way, note how the final blow is delivered again by the double pawn. King d6 obviously loses b7, and the most beautiful of all variations is king b8, allowing us to take the pawn still, because after rook takes d5, rook f8 mate is finishing the game. And look again, the double pawn takes all the glory. An absolutely marvelous positional performance. I find these games very difficult to analyze and understand, especially the middle game shuffling around. These moves like bishop g3, h4, king g2, bishop f2, they tend to come across to most players as just meaningless shuffling, not doing too much. But actually, this is real mastery, and Magnus managed to optimize all of his pieces, triggering a minor inaccuracy and then setting things in motion with his fantastic endgame technique and the support of the double pawns that allowed him to convert this game marvelously. What a start for Magnus Carlsen in the Sinquefield Cup. Now he's already leading the pack as all the other games were drawn. I'm super excited to continue watching this tournament and present to you every single day the game of the day. So stay tuned, because I'm going to go through this tournament with a daily recap. Look forward to seeing you in the next video. Please don't forget to sub, like, comment, and yep, I'm excited to see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.